through fields of dreams. To you it must seem long ago, the time before your embarkation, before you journeyed through the matter fields to the surface of this world. But to us the hour is early still, and much will change before morning has passed. You left us with instructions to bring you this record when the dawn was full. Come gather around this conscious fired. Darn it, I have to take the brownies out. I get distracted sometimes. Oh, maybe. This is gonna be amazing. Still not done. 5 more minutes. Well, this isn't gonna work. Okay. I'm back. All right. Where was I? We would tell you of the early hours when your thoughts first came to rest upon this world, when your love first illuminated the world and shone through robes of water and soil, days when we were with you yet, back when the world was young. Eons ago, before there was physical matter, you were one with us. Your essence remains even now, indistinguishable from the unified field. Being out of which flow, unified field of being out of which flow duality, multiplicity, and all that flourishes in the eternal play of polarities. In oneness with the eternal source, in flowing fluid realms of all spectrum, light, and love, we lived together in early ages of the morning. Together we shared a common I. As waves of energy, we flowed through fields of dreams and landscapes of our eternal home. Fields and dreams, the landscapes of our eternal home. There was a game we would sometimes play, an elementary energy exchange, an early form of relationship. A segment of source energy would break itself free from the main body and assume momentary individuality, personifying selected frequencies in order to experience relationships with others who had done the same. From the realm of eternal unity, we chose frequencies, hues, rates, and vibration. Like crystals of snow forming in a stratospheric cloud, we personified them in the field of our common being. Our locations created space, our movements time. The first personification of the Eternal One brought forth the second personification, and instantaneously the third. For the very thought of coalescing consciousness into an other immediately evoked a definition of one that was not one alone, but rather one including other. In the language of light, our word for other has no singular form, while both one and infinity are represented by the same word. The Trinity or Source is not 3 things alone, but 3 beings, including within them all beings. Its second and third persons contain 2 primary divisions that include all creation. Its first person embraces the 2 and all that they contain, extending far beyond their dimensional worlds, so far it cannot be conveyed in human terms. The basis of human languages implied that there was a linear sequence to the unfoldment of the one through Trinity into multiplicity, but in reality, this occurrence was and is as instantaneous as a thought intrinsic in the very nature of being. A thought that takes no time to appear, a thought, therefore, that has appeared many times before. Throughout eternity, this thought comes into being again and again. While it is sustained, time also comes into being. Throughout eternity, this thought comes into being again and again. While it is sustained, time also comes into being. When it is no longer animated, time ceases. The creation of specific beings or angels to sustain this thought over an open-ended stretch of time brought forth the steady stream of cumulative creation that has made possible and given birth to this present universe. Though there is no linear sequence to the unfoldment of the One into the Trinity, and indeed no linear sequence to the unfoldment of the eternal being into the cherubim and seraphim, thrones, principalities, and multiple personifications of eternal spirit, a linear sequence of events did occur in the spirit world prior to the first physical manifestations of light, sound, and matter. One second. Got to check the brownies. I made a double recipe, so they're taking a lot longer. You never really know how long they're gonna take. It's really just when the toothpick comes out clean. You put a toothpick in the middle, and when it's clean, they're done. Getting closer. Got 3 minutes. I'm gonna sit now. I was pacing. Okay. Let's see. As a fetus experiences gestation in the invisible realms before entering the stage of the visible world, so too do light, sound, galaxies, and all that they contain. Only after experiencing a cycle of development on the finer, more subtle frequencies of being, filling those realms to the full, do they spill over into physical objectification. In much of the same way, there was an invisible sequence of cause and effect that preceded your tumble into visible history. To rise again to your native levels of understanding, you must, in a certain sense, reverse that process. You can reverse the process without conscious understanding. A child's trust in the inherent benevolence of life is all that is required. A child's trust in the inherent benevolence of life is all that is required. A child's trust in the inherent benevolence of life is all that is required. However, given your historical tendency to gravitate toward behavior based upon conceptual knowledge, it would be well for you to have at least some understanding of the decision that led you to inhabit the image worlds of these semi-conscious primates. If you are blessed with a child's trust and your mind does not trouble you with questions of how you came today to be so biologically clothed, move on to the chapters that follow this. Yet if a day comes when your mind needs to be calmed with a reminder of what it has not forgotten in its depths, know that there's a reminder here for you in this account. If at any point this narrative, all right. So basically, I'm just going to read this chapter because it's so cool. It's this amazing imaginative take on how I got here. Where I'm guessing the person who is reading it, and I don't really think that this book shows up for people who aren't some kind of starseed, right? I don't know. I'm checking the brownies. Yeah. All right, done. I totally forgot I was in the middle of doing this. Thank goodness I set the timer before I started live streaming. Because we definitely would have remembered with the smell of burnt brownies and the smoke alarm going off. But that's all handled, so this is good because this is where I'm getting into like the fun part of this chapter. And I am just a fan of anything that's going to open up my imagination, you know? Like, I don't remember getting here. Do you? I don't remember very much. I mean, I think I know about my childhood, but then I think about my sisters, and they're almost like it's just like remembering different parts of myself, you know? And we're all just trying to follow these threads, and everything that's out here never gave us any good answers, right? So it's just fun to open up the imagination. Why not? All right. The fall from awareness. Scattered throughout the sea of eternal being are distinct locations that radiate specific qualities. These qualities permeate the entire sea of creation, rippling throughout all that is, but the source locations from which they radiate are either one of two constellations. These two constellations, love and truth, are two polarities of eternal being, two persons of the Trinity. They engender all that is. Their interplay evokes the universe and all the wonders it contains. I had to read it. I haven't actually, I have this book, but when I went to read it yesterday, I was so busy with some projects, like this driftwood that I'm been working on bleaching and drying out. I was so busy with it that I just found an audio recording of it on YouTube. It's like the robot voice, which I don't mind. I don't mind that sort of depersonalizedness, but I feel like I'm almost reading it for the first time. And when I read out loud, I understand it better. There's the part of me that listens when I read out loud is different than the part that's listening when I read silently. And I don't know if it's better or worse, but I feel like it just like sticks a little more when I do that. So I thought, if I'm just like sitting around my house reading out loud to myself, I'm gonna live stream this because then it'll be up there. And if somebody wants to be read to now or some other time later, then here you go. I'll read you some weird shit. Okay. Here we go. The fall from awareness. I'm going to just read this second half of this paragraph again. The two constellations, love and truth, are two polarities of eternal being, two persons of the Trinity. They engender all that is. Their interplay evokes the universe and all the wonders it contains. The constellation of love is the home of qualities associated with energy expression, and the constellation of truth is the home of qualities associated with form and structure. These two polarities overlap and interplay. Neither is devoid of qualities originating in the other. The radiations of each quality permeate the entirety of both constellations, but the source from which each quality radiates is located in one constellation or the other. With this interplay between constellation of qualities rooted in truth and a constellation of qualities rooted in love, individual spirit beings come into existence. It is within this context that your current cycle of individuality began. Each spirit being forms around specific frequency radiations of eternal qualities, consciously personifying them. Each individual spirit coalesces within the creative field that is generated by the interacting radiations of love and truth. And all the things from the galaxies to the microbes are manifestations of these spirit beings. Through them, the universe comes into form. There is no star in existence without a being who has chosen to appear as that star. Nor is there any planet, asteroid, sun, moon, no leaf, insect, flower, tree, no tiny ocean sail, no grain of sand on the beach, which does not form around a spirit life. I see you. See. When the first spirit beings, personifications of various qualities of awareness, would individualize and distinguish themselves from the main body of awareness to experience relationships with others who had done the same, they would, after each relationship, dissolve back again into unity out of which they came. Into the unity out of which they came. This process of individuation, spirits leaping dolphin-like from the sea of eternal unity into the air of individuality, thus then disappearing again beneath the waves of undifferentiated oneness, was purely for enjoyment. The process of individuation, spirits leaping dolphin-like from the sea of eternal unity into the air of individuality, then disappearing again beneath the waves of unified oneness, was purely for enjoyment. The first entities in the sea of being had no stake, no vested interest in their passing individual forms. One day you were individualizing certain qualities of eternal awareness. just emerging from a relationship, another entity of individualized awareness came to you and encouraged you to retain your present form of individuality and carry that form over into a new relationship. This was a new thought. It had never occurred to you to experience multiple relationships without a renewal of identity. Multiple relationships without a renewal of identity. You did not accept the idea immediately, but you did consider it. As you continued to listen, you mulled over its strange and fascinating possibilities. The curious being promoting this novelty appeared in a pulsating field of vibratory luminosity, infinitely more beautiful and well-defined than any you had ever seen. One of the attractive elements in this entity's proposal was that this path would, over time, allow formation of some sort of beautiful and intricate patterns within your own individualized field. But there was a dark side as well. Something else the entity said. You were not entirely certain of its accuracy. At first, you only saw humor in what seemed the absurdity of the thought. Yet as you considered it, you wondered if there might not be something to it. It took time and further argument, but eventually you were convinced by this entity that there was a possibility, perhaps even a strong one, that you might actually cease to exist if you did not follow this recommended course, consciously preserving your individuality from one relationship to the next. Took time and further argument, but eventually you were convinced by this entity that there was a possibility, perhaps even a strong one, that you might actually cease to exist if you did not follow this recommended course, consciously preserving your individuality from one relationship to the next. After all, you did not know exactly what happened to the individuals who dissolved back into the sea. This is the first lie that you believed. The form of your individuality would, of course, cease to exist if your awareness were no longer focused through it, just as the focus of light through a lens ceases to exist when the light is turned in another direction. Yet the potential for your individuality would remain, just as the lens itself remains, should you again choose to turn your attention toward it. It would not disappear. Potential can either be actualized or ignored, but it cannot be created or destroyed. All potential exists from the beginning and is eternal, as is the one whose being contains and sustains it. Use this moment through an individualized focus of your awareness. But you do not cease to exist with the cessation of that individuality. The awareness that shines through your lens of individuality is the awareness that shines through all lenses of individuality. You are the being behind all individuals. The awareness within and beyond all these things. You know this in spirit. To know this while in individual form is to be conscious. To imagine that you are the focus of individuality itself, and to imagine that you are the form and not the spirit that animates it is to be subconscious. Is to be subconscious. Interesting. What an interesting way of describing subconsciousness. To imagine that you are the focus of individuality itself, to imagine that you are the form and not the spirit that animates it is to be subconscious. When any personification of eternal awareness, your own essential awareness, comes into a relationship with any other, it flows into a form of self-identity that will optimize creativity and enjoyment during the relationship. Just as an environment shapes and molds the plants that flourish within it, relationships mold the forms of identity for all healthy spirit beings. Since relationships are ever-changing, healthy identities are ever-changing as well. flowing from moment to moment, assuming the forms most suited to creative exchange. In a healthy state, the continuity of identity occurs on the level of spirit, not on the level of form. Interesting. Okay, where were we? Your fall from awareness of your eternal nature into the illusion of separation was not a single event. It was gradual and at first a very subtle process. It began when you chose to retain a specific form of identity after the experience that had molded that identity had passed. Choosing to bring a past-centered identity into a present experience reduced your sensitivity to optimal interaction. Consequently, as you will see more clearly as our account progresses, your very presence was reduced along with the clarity of your perception. Choosing to bring a past-centered identity into a present experience reduced your sensitivity to the influences of the new moment. The new relationship could no longer guide identity patterns conducive to optimal interaction. As you will see more clearly as our account progresses, your very presence was reduced along with the clarity of your perception. What? This is as good an explanation as any. I mean, why not? Oh, by the way, I found this book in one of those take a book, leave a book stands somewhere along the way of my travels. I didn't even seek it out or buy it. Or maybe I got it at a used bookstore. It was maybe a book stand book, maybe one like free library giveaway. All I know is that I ended up with this book. I didn't seek it out. I've never heard of it. And I kind of like at first thought it was like an ET kind of thing, like some woo-woo, like a joke. But the way they paint the picture of what consciousness is doing, it's fun. It's a fun thought experiment, right? Wow. You quickly found that an identity based on memory of the past had to be consciously sustained. Unlike natural healthy identities which formed and dissolved without conscious effort, an arbitrary, past-oriented sense of self required maintenance. You began to take yourself more seriously. Don't do that. I used to do that. Okay, where was I? You began to take yourself more seriously. Here we go. You began to think of yourself more as the external form of expression and less as the spirit behind expression. You began to give your individual identity greater importance than it was due. You overlooked something vital. You forgot that you have the ability to individualize the quality of self. You forgot that you have the ability to individualize the quality of self perfect for each occasion. Overriding the natural process through which your sense of self spontaneously flows into organic expression, your presence, though in reality still coming from the eternal source, was no longer a clear extension of that source. Yet this was very subtle at first, merely a slight off-center shift in emphasis. After a time of many relationships upon the higher frequencies of the spirit world, you traveled with the others of your light circle toward the central region of the constellation of truth, the region known as the fields of structure. You entered the awesome and wonderful realms where the process of materialization was occurring. In the fields of structure, the thoughts in which you conceived yourself gradually began to draw to them the tiny crystallized particles that blew up from the region of stars far below. In the fields of structure, the thoughts in which you conceived yourself gradually began to draw to them the tiny crystallized particles that blew up from the region of the stars far below.
Many of us have gone through this materialization process consciously, identifying with matter only when we choose, keeping our original sense of spirit, self intact, remaining integral, whole, holy, connected with the Great Spirit, acquiring material clothing for purposes of creation and enjoyment, but never forgetting ourselves, never confusing the wearer of the robe with the fabric of the robe. But your habits of identity were such that this was not your experience. As particles of matter were drawn into your biogravitational thought fields, you began identifying with what was becoming an increasingly tangible form. As they were gradually clothed in successive layers of molecular structure, you began to see the thoughts of individuality that you had chosen to hold beyond their time. You were fascinated. You were very beautiful. Within the luminous field of energy that distinguished the focus of your attention, a body began to take shape. The first particles that gave it form were extremely fine and subtle, smaller than the finest molecules. You identified with the swirling patterns they formed within your energy field, those early forerunners of cells and organs. Until this point, your central motivation had always been love. It is true that it had been qualified from time to time by a sense of curiosity that was not always in your best interests, but there was an innocence about it, and certainly no selfish or fearful intent. Even as your etheric body formed within you, your motivation remained primarily centered in love. But as you played around the edges of the fields of structure and identified with ever more tangible and beautiful sheets of shimmering individuality, you would occasionally entertain in your consciousness a whispering of doubt, a whispering so effervescent, so subtle, so much at the periphery of your thoughts that you hardly noticed it at first. I am surprised by this sea, whispered the doubt, this sea of universal being. What if someday it is no longer here? Will its support always continue? Will it sustain my awareness forever? Does it care for my individuality? For these beautiful forms and patterns that my thoughts are creating with me, these patterns are what make me unique. I've been watching them for so long. I'm not entirely sure anymore what I would be without them. What if this sea of being, great and benevolent though it is, were to dislike my growing sheath of tangibility? What if a time comes when the sea is gone and I find myself alone? She's... Okay, I'm all done reading for now. Maybe I'll do it again tomorrow. And we'll just pick up where we left off, or maybe I'll have something else, or maybe it won't be at all. Who knows? Who knows?